Well, the person you're about to hear from sure is. I'm talking about Chris Martenson, peakprosperity.com. Chris, welcome back. So lies, lies, and more lies, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. So what is a person to do? Because you're constantly being lied to, and there seems to be no interest in the truth, is there?
Well, is it interest or is it appetite or is it ability to handle it? I don't know where we fall on this right now. I was just talking with somebody last night over a very long dinner. We were discussing a really wide range of topics, and this person has a lot of experience outside of the United States, as I do too. I travel quite a bit. And one thing you notice when you travel outside the United States is that there's almost like this bubble over the United States that it's got its own propaganda echo chamber, and you just can't have conversations inside the United States as easily as you can outside, where people are a little bit more curious. They don't know for sure what's happening, that they can entertain a wider range of possibilities. But in the United States, what's called the Overton window, the polite conversation,
yes,
it's a really tiny little window, and it's just really small, and you
exactly.
find different groups have different sort of, Overton windows that they can talk about. But it's like there's certain topics that are just verboten here. Right. And, if you with some people, and I think one of those would be the whole idea of Russiagate and what Russia really did, all of that, or U.S. foreign policy, where people are just insane about it. Mike Pompeo yesterday says, we're going to keep the pressure on Iran until they respect the rights of their people. And I'm one of these people that goes, the rights of the people. Yeah. I believe that the Constitution gave me rights against unreasonable government search and seizure. I believe it's enshrined in an amendment, and I believe the NSA violated that, and I believe the director of the NSA lied about that to Congress, and nothing happened. So what is it that we care about the rights again? So, it's just come to a fever pitch where, and here's my theory behind this, that underneath the covers, things are so rotten, so close to crumbling, that those people and institutions and people whose jobs depend on the system not being rotten and not crumbling are desperately trying to do everything they can to pretend like everything's okay. And one of the ways they do that is they don't allow you to talk about the ways things are not okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways in that regard. For sure, you look and you see, like, the economy has never recovered to where it was in 06, 07. You see that in the housing. New housing is 2/3 of what it was then, and pre-owned housing, is about the same. It's just this illusion or delusion that things have gotten back to so-called normal, right?
Yeah, and a lot of that is narrative control by the powers that be. I believe that the markets need quotes around them, markets, because they're not really markets anymore, where prices are discovered in a free and fair way. I believe that markets now are largely a government utility, and by that I mean it's not just the Treasury Department controlling it, but that there's a ring of protected industries that surround the Treasury Department. That would include companies like Citadel and all these other, big high volume HFT companies. And together, they're locked together in this idea of saying, and I'm sure they've got a very compelling narrative that makes sense to them. Listen, it's really important. We couldn't really, we're at a delicate part with our trade negotiations. So we need to send strength as a signal through the markets. We can't let gold get out of control right now because that would send a bad signal. Whatever the reasons are. They've been controlling the markets to send signals, and that means it's a utility, and it's got utility pricing. And one of the things it's not doing is our markets are no longer telegraphing appropriate signals to us.
Right.
And I wrote a big, long article about that called The Company Store, which basically points out this idea that the real producers of real wealth, so these are the people who convert sunlight into corn. They take ore out of the ground, very expensive, labor-intensive, high-risk process, and turn it into metal. That those people have seen their profits basically hover around zero for decades, right? Say, simple argument. Corn today on a per bushel basis costs exactly the same, nominal, not inflation adjusted, exactly the same as it did 22 years ago, right? Think about input costs over the last 22 years, right? Land, fertilizer, seed corn, diesel fuel, all those input costs have exploded, right? And so the way the farmers have had to navigate that territory is by going deeper and deeper into debt. And of course, debt is just a thing where you understand, once you understand how financial markets work, debt is, banks just make debt out of thin air. Like they loan you money and they make money out of thin air, and then they harvest your output over time in interest. And so when you look at this, you look at the real producers of wealth, basically almost always for those last 20 years have had their noses barely above water. And so these are the producers of real wealth, the people who are taking real risk, but who's harvesting? There's actually a lot of value in a bushel of corn. Who harvests that? I mean, by the time that corn gets made into cornflakes and shows up on my store shelf, it's somehow turned into $5 a box, right? So somewhere in there, somebody made a lot of money. And who was that? And we find that most of the profits of our culture are going to the financialized participants, right? They're harvesting almost all of that, which makes them the equivalent of owners of the company store, right? The miners would have to work in the mines, and then they were only allowed to sell, use their script they were handed for their labor at the company store with massive markups, and they could barely keep their noses above water. And it was a very predatory system. And so that's what I'm seeing go on. The price of silver right now, for instance, is below the cost of production for most of the major producers, and it's an absolute travesty that the price of silver is set by not producers, not consumers, but by this overarching architecture of predatory, we call them speculators, but they're parasites.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you see the financialization of the economy is really, that's what's kind of put us over the edge here, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it has. It's a big tragedy because the financialized people, they know the price of everything but the value of nothing. They don't produce anything. They really take no risk at all. They don't put any work in. And I know that hedge fund operators would disagree strongly, and private equity people say, "Oh, we take enormous risk, Chris. You don't understand. We have billions at risk." But the truth is, they don't start any companies. They don't have to gauge market demand. They don't have to figure out how to outcompete another producer. Doing hard work. And so the financialization has really strip mined a lot of our industry. And so, Trump comes forward, a trade war, China's, doing bad things to us. But the truth is, that's not exactly right. What happened was the financialization made it almost impossible to produce anything at a profit in the United States. So corporations picked up and moved to places they could do business. And with labor costs and do it more profitably. That's what happened.
Absolutely. And you're 100% spot on. And really it's a cancer. It's not just the United States. It's all over the freaking world here, even in the so-called developing nations, maybe especially, because if you've got a gold mine in Ghana, how are you going to finance it? Maybe you can get a bank to do it, or worse yet, find other sources of capital, but you're going to pay through the nose. And one of the things you're going to have to do is sell your production into the future market to ensure the bank gets repaid. It's kind of madness here.
Well, it is. And that great hollowing out, I think, is when I mentioned before, there's this rot that nobody really wants to talk about. The truth is it's a rotten system, and financialization and speculation don't generate wealth. They suck wealth out. And as we saw a few years ago, the Panama Papers comes out. It's just one leak out of 1,000, I'm sure that could happen, but it was the one that did happen to happen. And it showed that everybody from the Queen of England down to, Larry, the private equity guy, was busy, taking trillions of dollars and hiding them in offshore tax vehicles. And so that's what financialization has given us, this super predatory elite who have more money than they can possibly spend, and they use money to make money, and they keep harvesting that and tucking it away in offshore accounts and other vehicles and places, and they use it to subvert the political process and rewrite tax codes to their benefit and do all the tricks that you would do if you had such a wealth advantage to maintain that. But it's gone on far enough now that we're starting to see the first wrinkles of the very wealthy getting concerned. And some of them are billionaires with bug out shelters in New Zealand. Some of them are like Ray Dalio coming out going, geez, something seems to be a little off in capitalism, but sorry, Ray, it's not capitalism.
No, it's definitely not.
It's corporatism. Passes. It's a totally different thing.
Hey, you know what I compare it to? Like we have this thing called food, and really it's most of what's out there, Chris, is what passes for food. Like McDonald's, fast food passes for food. It's not food. It passes for it. It's very rare to find real food. And our economic system is exactly the same thing. This is what passes for capitalism, but it's really not. It's crapitalism. It's whatever else you want to call it. There's a whole bunch of different terms. Creditism. But there's no capitalism left. Not when you walk into a store, you pull out your credit card, you charge up a basket of groceries, and that adds to the money supply. There's something wrong with everything that we're seeing here.
Yeah, and so we had, I have to rewind the tape a little bit here. Let's go back to 1994. There was this hiccup in the corporate bond market, and it freaked out the Federal Reserve under Alan Greenspan at the time. And so they did something where they opened up the credit spigots hugely by creating a program called the Sweeps Program. Invite any listener to look this up. Basically, it allows a bank to sweep your demand account, that's checking savings, into an overnight money market account with your name on it, but it's a time deposit. So they don't have to hold reserves against it. This was just a fancy sort of a way to allow banks not to have to hold reserves anymore. So guess what? Banks with zero reserve requirements can loan an infinite amount. Hey, and so then we got the roaring 90s big credit bubble that blew up, right? Mm-hmm. And so what did we get? Well, now we got these 1% Bernanke blowout rates, and then we got this side bubble called the housing bubble. That wasn't the main story. That was still a side bubble. Bad. It was pretty destructive. People consider it the main bubble, but it wasn't. And then we got Yellen, and we got our 0%, never before in 5,000 year blowout credit, extravaganza, negative yields in Europe, all this crazy stuff, right? And still, this is, now that we're here with the everything bubble that we're talking about when this burst, we still have to rewind the tape all the way back to the late 70s, early 80s, which is when the world went on this financialization experiment. And the experiment was rooted in this really dumb idea. You could grow credit at twice the rate you could grow income. Mm-hmm. You can do that for a while, and you can play games. And as long as you concentrate the wealth and, all of it's ending up in a very few hands. So mainly they're competing over like trophy art, properties, Gulf Streams, gems, stuff like that.
Right.
It doesn't really show up in the larger system. You can continue that for a while, but it's still rooted in this idea that you can grow your credit, your claims at twice the rate GDP. You can grow your income. You can't do that. And that's Absolutely. Where we are. That's what they're trying to preserve so desperately, is another couple of turns of that wheel. But anybody with grade school math skills can say, you can't do that forever.
This ain't going to work. It's not.
Right.
It can't work. Right. We know that it can't work. We've seen this before. It's a lot like just like an individual homeowner who hawks everything in the house, and leases an auto. And how long can that go on unless your income goes up? It just can't, right?
Right. And so that's the larger sweep of this story. And, meanwhile, you have the United States very, very busy alienating pretty much everybody on the planet at this point, which I think is a bad strategy. The whole bully strategy is fine for a while, but we're doing everything from, threatening Germany's energy supplies by threatening to sanction the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which they desperately need, right? Telling them that they can't buy Iranian oil and telling China that, they have to bend to every one of our trade demands, and which is I consider negotiating in bad faith. Not that we don't need a different trade deal with China, but I'm just saying the strategy, the way, the approach, the methods, the whole carry a big stick and threaten everybody in the world. That's cool when there's plenty of resources to divvy up. But when things get tight, like they are now, because we're at the end of this stupid credit bubble idea that began in the late 70s, we're at the tail end of cheap energy at this point in time. We're at the tail end of all kinds of things. It says it's a new world. But I feel like the United States is kind of like that old guy at the end of the block who's, tells you screams at you to get off their lawn. They're really stuck in their ways.
Yeah, he's like ready for the nursing home.
Yeah, it's a new world. There's more people living on your block. It's just how it happens, but they can't adjust to that. And so it feels to me like we're at that uncomfortable spot in history where things are changing really rapidly. And the United States has defaulted by slipping back into old behaviors, instead of adjusting to the new reality. So I don't see a lot of fresh air politically out there. And the thing that cracks me up is seeing who the top Democratic National Committee polling people, like Joe Biden, it's polling at the top. Stop the bus. Let me off. Yeah. Come on.
Oh, him, Joe Biden. It's a joke.
Just what we need. Another aging white guy with old ideas who hasn't had an original one in probably 50 years, who does creepy things on tape. It's just like, come on. That's like not even remotely where we need to be in this story, but that's all the system can think to elevate and put forward at this point in time, because it really, to do other than Joe Biden, to elevate somebody with fresh ideas who really comports with this new world, means you would have to recognize that it is a new world and that there's a lot of rot in the old one, and face that directly. So it's just like Joe Biden is the ultimate. He's like the poster child for a nation in denial, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, I think his poll bounce will be short-lived, because he's one of those kind of candidates, the more you find out about him, the less you like him. There's a lot of them out there like that this time around, but he's not, physically, you look at him, he's a wreck. So, I mean, he's 76 years old. I hope I'm in that good shape when I'm 76, but I wouldn't pretend to want to be running the country or the world at that age. It's craziness. Crazy.
Oh, absolutely. And he's I'm not sure what more people need to find out about him, but there's so much stank on that candidate that, again, the fact that the media isn't running with that, like his son Hunter Biden totally was up corrupt to all kinds of skullduggery, and there's like, if any of the things that Hunter Biden had been done by Trump Jr., I mean, my goodness, the volume, and rightly so, I believe, of media inquiry and hate around that would be extraordinary. There's really ugly stuff with Ukraine and China, and it looks money grubbing, because it is, and it's just nasty. So we really desperately need a swamp draining, and I'm just afraid that we're too far gone to really get the one that we need at this point in time.
Oh, I totally agree.
Trump didn't get it done. He actually installed more swamp critters than Obama did, practically, and that was a tough bar to exceed.
Yeah. Well, hey, but we'll see what happens with the unmasking of all of the spying that was going on with Trump, because that could definitely have the potential to blow it all out. To really.
Well, it could, and I'm as hopeful as the next person to say, we'd love to see some actual consequences fall where they should. But I'm still not holding my breath, because these things have a bad habit of just sort of getting swept under.
Yeah, they certainly do.
Away.
They certainly do, and I totally don't disagree with you there. But you got to have a little bit of hope, I guess, tempered by reality.
Yeah,
tempered by reality. You have to have a little bit, right?
It's
just amazing that it's gone on as long as it has, and no one seems to want to do anything about it. So hopefully something will come about. So in the meantime, we got all these problems here. Chris, what do you do about it? You, the individual, to protect your family, yourself, etc.
Well, this is where I think people need to be prepared for the fact that these changes are coming. There is a new world coming. It's spiraling down on us really rapidly. I think people have to become the change they wish to see. You don't wait to read about it above the fold in the Wall Street Journal. Don't wait for your friends to start doing it. You have to get out there and start becoming more resilient, right? And this means really going through and building up those 8 forms of capital we talk about in Prosper, which is our solution book that Adam Taggart and I wrote. and, build up your financial capital for sure, but also your social capital and your living capital. Don't be eating that McDonald's food, right? There's a lot of poisonous food out there. So make sure your body, your living capital is in good shape and really, really healthy. And build up your knowledge, your skills. That's a form of capital that you can transport with you anywhere you need to go. Because I believe that when this bubble bursts, I'm not talking like the everything bubble. I'm not talking like stocks retreat 40%. If I'm right, what we're facing is the collapse of a bubble that began back in the late 70s, early 80s, as we talked about. That's going to take decades to work itself through. And that's if we're lucky. So I think we're coming into a really hard period of time. So we recommend diversified income streams, because if you have a single job and a single paycheck, you're exposed. And understanding the difference between wealth and claims on wealth, right? Yeah. Real wealth, land, hard tangible assets, productive assets, and things like that. It's not the ones and zeros on a hard disk that say you have a portfolio with Merrill Lynch, right? It's you got to have real assets in this story, because we just printed up way too many claims. And, the next part of this story is easy to predict. The central banks are going to print like crazy again when they have to. Only this time, I think it sort of, nudges us closer to that Venezuela style outcome.
Think so, huh? Like we become Venezuela, huh?
Well, you have two choices. I'm an Austrian economist at heart when it comes down to these things. In a number of respects. And I think they got the credit markets right. And so that von Mises quote that says, either you voluntarily abandon your credit cycle or you face the destruction of the currency system involved, right? The fact that we've had all the central banks sort of colluding on creating and perpetuating this credit cycle, and that includes People's Bank of China, Japan, ECB, Fed, they're all in on it. But all they've really done is just created, let the credit just run too far. And the currency system ran too far. So, sooner or later, the amount of real stuff and the claims on real stuff, that's an equation that has to balance again at some point in time. So either you believe we're going to triple the size of the world economy magically, or you believe the claims get reduced in some fashion. How do they reduce? Well, deflation, they blow up. And that's very bad, and people hate that. And the people who hold the claims are also in power, so they actually don't like that. So they always go for the other one, which is the inflationary outcome. Why do you do that? Well, that's because you steal from everybody. So billions pay into that system and eat the losses rather than the 3,000 who own it all, right? So
that's
guess which one's
socialism.
More popular?
That's called socialism, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's why we can't say we have capitalism, because it's clear that, capitalism only applies in certain narrow times and in places, which includes the fact that little people eat the losses. But the big people, Goldman Sachs really gets in trouble and is in danger of going tits up because they made some bad decisions. They're going to get bailed out, right? Because reasons, right?
You remember Leonia Helmsley what she said to her maid, that taxes are for little people to pay, right? The big people don't pay taxes. And I think that's where we're kind of at here. The dual system of justice, the dual economic system. If you're up from the food chain of the people that get to benefit from the newly created digital dollar economy, you're a cleaning clock, whether you're in the financial sector, whatever. If you're in Main Street and you actually make stuff for a living and use your hands and work, that type of work has been wholesalely diminished. I mean, hey, look, I sent my kids to college. I didn't want my son to work in a loom producing textiles. It's better a third world country does it. It's only natural that you want what's better for your kids. But really, is it better that your kid knows how to fix your car and knows how to weld together some metal, and they get paid above average income than from somebody in Main Street? Welder now, 80, 90,000 a year, first year out of trade school. So maybe we all made a big mistake because we bought into the, hey, it's much more dignified and much more socially superior to work in an office and wear a suit and jacket to a tie and jacket to work every day than it is to wear work clothes and work boots and go actually make stuff. I mean, we're kind of going back to what you started talking about. So it's a values thing in our society. In China, I don't think they look down on those working people the way they do here in the U.S.
Well, it's absolutely true that one of the things that our school system does is it wants everybody to buy into this narrative that the way you are successful is you get as much education as you can, and you go out and you get as much of a paycheck as you can. Mm-hmm. When the true fact is the people who really actually get rich, none of them work for paychecks, right? They all start businesses. They all, they're entrepreneurs in some way, shape, or form, and that the tax laws are actually fashioned in a way that punishes you most if you're a worker. And the more successful you are as a worker, the more punishing the tax code becomes. The most punishing section of the tax code is for a small business person who runs their own small business, right? You might pay upwards of 60%, depending on the state you're in, if you're like a doctor with a 5-person practice or a lawyer with a small law firm, right? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, if you are a Leona Helmsley, if you're in the real estate sector, paying 0% taxes is very ordinary. In fact, you're doing something wrong if you're a real estate investor and you're not paying 0% in taxes. And that's because the government wants houses and it wants things. It incentivizes certain behaviors, but it's a mystery to me why capital gets taxed out at a max rate of 20%, where income gets taxed out at a max rate of 60%. Once you factor in the small business person paying their own FICA, Medicare, state taxes, all that stuff, right? It's just a mystery, but that's what the government has said. It said, if you work in this sector, we're going to hit you with 60%. Over here, it's 20% to 0%. So we reward money, making money off of money.
Let me tell you,
we tax people hardest who actually generate in real wealth and provide real services.
It's even worse than that, because if your primary income is passive, okay, or your whatever, passive or just it's not actively earned, under the new tax law, using some creative strategies that several people I know have designed, you are actually in a position where you can get away with paying virtually no taxes, and we can show you how to do it completely legal. But what you're saying about what's happened to the working guy, this last tax bill totally screwed him. I think we're going to have to leave it at that. But peakprosperity.com, go check it out. What will you see when you go to Peak Prosperity, Chris?
We've got all kinds of podcasts and we've got all kinds of written articles, but mostly it's a community of people who see these changes coming and want to know, hey, what should I do about it? So come on by, check it out. A lot of great content there.
A lot of great content, excellent articles and videos and podcasts done by Chris and company. Highly recommended.